We are looking at the risk assessment in Elint. Elint's risk assessment is divided into different columns and it looks like a little dashboard. Each dashboard is a representation of activities and tasks linked to those activities within a specific workplace. The activities, you have multiple activities in a business with multiple tasks linked to one activity. And you have different workplaces which affects the environment people work in and ultimately affects the way you would score your risk. We have hazards and risks, but we can also have impact and aspect or causes and effect depending on what risk analysis you are busy with. The controls is a section where we identify what management measures you've got in place or controls you've got in place to mitigate the risks that you have identified or the aspects that you might have identified. Opportunities is a new requirement from the ISO standards where we have to look at what opportunities there may be when doing a risk analysis. This section here is your risk rating, which is your matrix, how the risk calculator works. Each label, intensity, extent, duration, probability, works together out of 100 and that would give you your score. You have as a client the opportunity to identify what you want to measure in your calculator, so you don't have to use all 4 elements, you can only use 2 or 3 of them, but the score will still work out of 100. The stakeholder requirement and legal requirement is just a yes and a no and does not affect the calculator. It's not a legal register. It just brings to mind to the user that there might be legislation or stakeholder requirement for the specific task that's performed under activity within the business. The next column is your baseline risk assessment. So the very first time you do your risk calculation, you will find your baseline risk score. Once you've done that and you put your controls in place and you mitigate the risk, you review your risk assessment, and that's your residual risk that we find in the next column, which is your colorful column. You'll see that we have safety on top and then we'll have health. So this identifies if you have done a risk analysis looking at safety, health, environment, quality, even business if you want to use it for business risk assessment, risk analysis. On your left hand side we have filters that you can use to filter your risk assessment. So you can do it per activity, you can filter per workplace or what we call a project, so that's your specific workplace. You can filter to see if it's health, safety, environment or quality, and then obviously you can also filter from high to low to see what is your highest scores and what is your lowest scores for this specific activity. If we're going to filter high to low for all of them, you'll see the difference in the reading. Okay, you'll notice that we have a red section and then it goes to orange and then green. So the calculator works out of 100, as I've mentioned. Your first 30, which means it's 100 to 70, would be red. Anything below 70 to 30 is orange, and anything below orange would be your green, which is your controlled risks. You have the opportunity to download a PDF, and the PDF looks like this depending on what you have selected. It will PDF with a date stamp when it was PDF'd, as well as uncontrolled if printed. Elint is used as a live risk assessment for the user to use, and the printed documents is for tender purposes or audits if you want to print or email the risk assessment to a client or auditor. The section here is where we actually go in to make sure that we can score our risk assessment. This is your calculator. So we have in the back, we have your intensity, and here we have labels. If you are a premium client, you will be able to change the labels to read according to your own requirements. Here's the section where we fill in our opportunities, if there's any opportunities that you've identified. And then obviously we have our controls that you've identified, and if this is associated, the specific risk assessment is associated with a management measure, it links back into the management measure. We're not going to have a look at that section now. We'll just have a look at the basics of the risk assessment. Now, to load a risk assessment, the administrator will load up your risk assessment in the back end of the system, and all the user will have to do is go in and search for an activity. So let's say working at heights. You add it, you tick what is applicable, you rate your very first baseline rating. Let's just go in and rate them. And once you've done your rating, you save it, and it added that specific risk assessment for you. It's added that specific risk assessment for you, and that's the risk assessment module. The view controls is if we have linked a management measure to the specific risk assessment. If we click on views, it will take controls, it will take us to the CMS, where we actually control the activities that's linked with the risk assessment.